children used to play in the roadway in those days. It was a wonderful place to play. The traffic was almost nil. There was no motor traffic, of course, of any kind. It was just horse-drawn. The milkman would come up with his milk float and his great huge churns of milk. And then there was the baker. He'd come down with his baker's cart. It was a big high cart with his horse. And you could smell the bread, and it'd be warm as you got by the baker's cart. It'd smell warm bread. And then the greengrocer didn't come up every day. Some days he would come. The coalman always came on a Friday, but it was always horse and cart. You never saw anything else but horses and carts, and hand carts. The fishmongers would have big flat cars, and they'd have a donkey or a small pony bringing it. But the hand cart would be absolutely piled with, say, sprats. And the housewives would go out with their plate, and he'd weigh a pound and put it onto your plate, and you'd take them in the house. When all these horses and carts had gone by, then the roadway was quite free. Now, the horses sometimes dropped manure on the road, but nearly always the householders would be there with a shovel and a bucket to get it up, because they loved it for their rose trees, you see. And the road was always clean, because once a week it was washed. Now, of course, today with motor cars it would be impossible to do that. But in those days, the councilmen would come down the road, there'd be 4 of them with huge brass brooms, big hefty brooms, and they'd sweep all the dirt into piles all the way down the road, first on one side and then on the other. 4 men all sweeping. And then another cart would come down with 2 men who would shovel this dirt up, put it into the cart, and away it would all go. Then would come the water cart. It was a great big tank with a big sprinkler at the back. The water sprinkled out, and it was a lot of water washing on the road, and all these men with their brooms would swish and swish the water backwards and forwards until the roadway was absolutely beautiful and clean. And they did that at least once a week. So we children playing in the roadway, it was always nice and clean. You could sit down, it didn't really matter. It was an ideal place for children to play. We played hopscotch, we played hide and seek, we played skipping. The girls would have a rope from one side of the road to the other, a bit of mother's old clothesline, I expect, and we'd skip in. The 2 girls, one at each side, would turn the wool, and we would all turn the rope, and we would all skip in, and then we would sing, all in together, girls, never mind the weather, girls. I saw Esau sitting on a seesaw. Shoot, bang, fire, and everybody would run out. And if you were caught in the rope, then you had to take your turn with the turning of the rope. But the boys played tip-cat. Now, this was a game that I always think was because they couldn't afford cricket bats and cricket balls. My brother made his own bat, and he used to make his own tip-cats. They were about 6 inches long, piece of broomstail often used, and would be sharpened at each end to a point, like a pencil sharpened. And then they had their bat, and they'd put the tip-cat on the floor, and they'd hit the one end where the point was, you see, and the tip-cat would shoot up into the air. And as it was in the air, they'd get the bat and hit it as far as ever they could. And the tip-cat would go right down the road. And they all had turns, and the one whose tip-cat went the most distance, that was the boy that had won. Sometimes they had 3 turns, so that they'd go right down to the bottom of the road sometimes. I remember once them hitting the tip cat into one of our neighbours' windows. I was playing out in the road, you see, and of course there were about 4 boys playing. My brother was one, and suddenly, crash, it had hit a window, you see. So my brother looked at these other boys and he said, well, that's it, come on. And they all followed him down the road and they knocked on the door of this house. And Mr. Reynolds came to the door and they said, we're sorry, Mr. Reynolds, but we've broken your window. And he said, well, what you going to do about it? So my brother said, I'm just going to tell my dad. So he said, right. So they turned away from that. They didn't say this boy has done it or that boy has done it. They didn't split on who it was, you see. There was the 4 boys. They came back home and called my father, and he came. And it was on a Saturday because my father was at home. My father, he said, you've broken a window? Oh, where? And so they said, down at Mr. Reynolds. So he said, oh, all right, I'll see to it. So he didn't grumble at them, only to say, well, be more careful in future, that kind of thing. But there was no row, shall I say, about it. He went down to Mr. Reynolds and he said, I'm awfully sorry they've broken your window, Mr. Reynolds. He said, I'll see to it straight away. He said, do you mind if I come in and measure? And, no, that's all right, he said. And it was only a small glass, only a glass about 12 by 8, something like that, a small pane of glass that had got broken. And my father took his measuring tape and he measured it and came back and put his hat on and he went down the road to the ironmongers. Of course, the ironmongers were open until about 10 o'clock at night, you see. 8 to 10 o'clock at night. The shops didn't close in those days. They'd all put their lights on, you see, when it got a bit dark, and shops would be open. He went down to the ironmongers, he bought the glass and he bought the putty, and he came up, and within an hour that pane of glass was in the window. No more trouble. But he did say to the boys, I don't think I should play any more today at that, and do be careful in future. But what I think about since, I've thought about it quite a lot. Those boys didn't run away. When they'd broken a window, they didn't run and hide or pretend it was nothing to do with them or anything about that. They straight went to tell the man they'd done it, which was, you know, it's nice to think about, really. They were good lads, very good lads. And it was street lamps, gas lamps, and every night the lamplighter would come up the road and light the lamps all the way down the road. You see, when we used to play after tea, my mother would say, now come in when the lamplighter comes down. And all the children were the same, and we'd play, and if we saw one of the lamps go on up the top of the road, you see, we'd say, oh, hurry, come on, is the lamplighter coming? And we had to hurry and finish the game, you see, before the lamplighter got down. But as soon as he'd been and lit the lamp, which was on the opposite side of the road to where I lived, when that was lit, into the house we always went. And it was the usual thing, that was, with all the children in the road. They all went in as soon as the lamplighter came down.